Okay, hello, good morning everyone, and thank you for coming and welcome to this FIIA Climate Day 2025. I'm very happy to welcome you to this morning session, which is about environment and peace in the era of climate crisis. And since this is a whole climate day, we also have an afternoon event which deals with the BRICS countries and the climate policy globally. But now, this morning, we will focus on issues of peace and security and the environment. My name is Emma Hakala. I'm a leading researcher at FIIA and at the Center for Climate, Politics and Security, where we do research on international affairs and climate and environmental issues, and also issues very much linked with peace and security questions and environment. And today we will talk about how biodiversity loss and environmental degradation hamper security and societal resilience everywhere in the world, and how environmental degradation can also be a conflict driver, especially in these areas where there already are fragility or insecurity, inequality or poor governance and such factors. But then we will also talk about how environmental protection can be a driver for peace building and how it can yield opportunities for peace by bringing actors together. Even actors that have conflicting interests can sometimes agree on environmental issues, and that can then be a source of broader cooperation. And especially in this time where security is eroding and the geopolitical situation is increasingly insecure, it is all the more important, even though we tend to then somehow put off environmental issues and climate goals, for example. I think our discussion today will show that it is actually all the more important to talk about climate and environmental issues in order to make sure that we have a secure future ahead of us. So today's seminar will proceed as follows. I will give you a very short kind of outline presentation now first on how the ecological crisis affects peace and security, just to give you some broad ideas and kind of a general introduction to the topic. And then we have excellent speakers. First we have Sandra Valenzuela, who will talk about the situation especially in Colombia, and give you more specific examples on the topic. And then we will have a panel also with excellent speakers. I will maybe present all the speakers as we move along in the program. So perhaps for now I will just go ahead with my presentation. But just to remind you that we will have an opportunity for audience questions at the end of the seminar. So please, if you have any, or if you think of any questions, then write them down and we will give you a chance to ask them later on. So without further ado, I guess I'll start with explaining kind of the basics of how ecological crisis is linked to peace and security questions. And the sort of starting points here for my presentation are that not only climate change, but also biodiversity loss and the degradation of natural resources and pollution threaten security in various ways. And it is also maybe important to understand that the risks that they cause can be very varied. So they can be direct, cascading, or linked to sustainability transition. And I will explain this in more detail in just a moment. And because of these linkages of the environment to security and peace, it is very important to take environmental needs and issues into account when we are planning some sort of conflict resolution or peace mediation processes. And then finally, as I said in my introduction, the efforts that we do to address environmental degradation can also yield opportunities for peace. And I think actually in the later parts of the seminar we'll hear more about that. So I mentioned the direct cascading and transition risks to security caused by environment-related causes. So I will explain a bit more in detail what I mean by these different categories. So first we have the direct risks, which are the sort of very direct or immediate effect that environmental degradation has on humans or societies. And when we think specifically about environment or biodiversity loss and then how it affects peace and conflict dynamics, you could see that, for example, loss of habitat and the degradation of natural resources can sort of drive conflict in various ways. Here we have an example of the Democratic Republic of Congo, where habitat loss, for example, the loss of forests due to this, the conflict and the efforts also to finance the conflict, has also then somehow maintained this insecurity and thereby contributed to the ongoing conflict there. And often habitat loss can also, for example, lead to these local conflicts about agricultural land, for example, which can maybe not in itself create a conflict, but at least contribute to a conflict in a situation where there already are other factors that are sort of making conflict more likely. But then perhaps a bit more complicated category is the one of cascading risks, where the environmental impact is sort of combined with some sort of socioeconomic factors, and often also they then create these sort of chains of effects that also cross national borders and can affect a broader area in a way. So this could be issues like disruptions in critical supply chains, or competition for natural resources, or forced migration. And here I have a nice picture from a very good report that WWF has published with Adelphi, where you see some of these sort of pathways of how biodiversity loss and environmental degradation through various sort of dynamics then leads to some sort of security risks. Like, for example, when you have degrading food security or water security or energy security due to the fact that you have less access, for example, to natural resources, that can then lead to sort of dissatisfaction due to prices rising or things like that, which can then lead to political instability and overwhelm governments and so on. Another pathway is linked to human mobility, where, of course, when the nature and natural resources are being eroded, sometimes migration is, in fact, the only way, in a way, to adapt to this change. If it's impossible, or if it becomes impossible to farm land or even live in some areas of the world, then you have no choice but to move to another place. And if this migration is dealt with adequately in the target or the host areas where people end up going, it can actually be a very workable strategy. But if the integration of these migrants is not dealt with that well, then there is a chance or a possibility of, for example, some sort of conflict, at least in areas where there already, again, are pressures on, for example, resource use and other dissatisfaction to the local governance or whatever, things like that. And then finally, another pathway is terrorism or extremist movements. Biodiversity loss can lead to people losing their livelihoods, which then makes it more likely that in areas where there already are extremist groups that are active, that people will be recruited to these as they have no other sort of alternatives for their livelihoods. And that, of course, then contributes again to kind of maintaining this insecurity in the local context. So the important thing here is that that the environmental causes are always linked to other factors that are somehow prevalent in the area or in the society, so that it's also important to consider that environmental issues do not take place in some sort of vacuum, but they are always sort of in context with other issues as well. And then finally, we have transition risks, which are linked to the sort of unwanted consequences of sustainability transition. And here the idea is not at all to say that we shouldn't be moving ahead fast with for example, the mitigation of climate change, but just to remind us that the changes, for example, structural changes to society that we have to do are so vast that they will inevitably have some consequences in society, and if we are not careful with what kind of policies, for example, we implement, these consequences might also be harmful. So, for example, the energy transition causes new material demands and dependencies, and then also if we, for example, do climate policy in a not well-planned way, we might cause new problems for societal inequality and therefore instability. Here I have an example of increasing renewable energy production where that can cause problems locally. Again, if for example, the sort of location of these, for example, wind energy installations are not planned well enough, they can cause questions of, well, first of all, environmental harm. If, for example, a forest is cut down due to some windmills, but then also questions of land use or indigenous rights or even local conflict if, again, if there is some sort of insecurity or instability in the local context already existing. And then globally, the increase for the minerals that are needed for example, windmills or solar panels can cause environmental harm as we mine in new regions and for example, in areas where the environmental regulations are not followed that carefully. It can also lead to corruption or child labor or human rights violations, or then in the worst case scenario, it can help to maintain conflict if we are not careful about how we and where we sort of extract these materials for renewable energy production. But these were some examples, and now we will go into a lot more detail about all of these questions, and maybe move also more to the issue of how we resolve conflicts or build peace through environmental or by addressing environmental risks. So I will let Sandra talk. I will just briefly present you. So Sandra Valenzuela is the CEO of WWF Colombia, and she's a lawyer with a degree from Rosario University in Bogota, and she also has a dual master's degree in international affairs and development studies. And she has nearly 30 years of experience and has become a recognized leader in conservation at the intersection of security, climate, nature, and food systems. So she's exactly the person that we need to talk to us. So please go ahead, Sandra.
Thank you, Emma. Good morning. Thanks for having me here. I'm really honored to be able to share some thoughts and actions that we need to take into consideration in our pathway to the COP30, because it's a key momentum to demonstrate all the synergies that Emma was highlighting in terms of the biodiversity loss that we are suffering due to different conflict for access to natural resources, legally and illegally. But also the land degradation and the forest degradation that is promoting different climate change effects, not only in terms of more gases, but also in terms of more vulnerability and an action for adaptation. So I think it's the right time to have this climate day and understanding all these nexus between security, peace, environment, land degradation, forest degradation, and the biodiversity loss. So I'm going to refer about a case study in the Amazon, and I want to all of us to reflect that here in Finland we have an Amazon. We know that the Amazon is in a crucial status. As we call in the science, we are in a tipping point because of forest loss, because of land use changes due to, for instance, illegal mining and other type of occupation and land grabbing, or different type of commodities that all of us, we use even here in our daily life. Coffee, cacao, beef, soya, and others. And if we lose the Amazon, the Arctic will not exist because of the systemic understanding and the synergies about how the Amazon provides all the environmental services towards the marine areas and towards the Arctic. So it's a time that all of us, we feel that we have an Amazon, even here, that we feel that is quite far away, but it's really necessary to feel it. So I will talk a little bit about the geopolitics and how the geopolitics in the Amazon, in the Colombian Amazon, but also within the 8 countries in the Amazon, are being reflecting in this forest degradation, land degradation, but also the need to be a just transition and inclusive transitions with the communities, and of course a call to action from COP16 to COP30. So as we all know, Colombia has been in different type of conflicts for the different 60 years. And I would like to highlight what happened in the 91, the 90 and the 91, that we agree with two big and important armed groups, peace. And also in 91, we have a new and very visionary and revolutionary constitution to really support the rights of nature, the rights of communities, indigenous Black communities, as we call Afro-descendant, and also the campesinos, or the badly called landless, to really promote land, access to land tenure, land rights, but also access to the minimum for living natural resources, and different actions, legal actions, that really envision our country as really promoting our conservation and climate and SDG goals. So since the 90s, with this visionary constitution, we have been promoting peace with a different type of armed groups fighting against different type of inequalities. In the 2016, we have a very important peace agreement adopted by law in 2017, but sadly hasn't been really fully implemented. And right now we are over different type of peace processes to the country, and I will show a few maps for you to understand, with multiple armed and different emerging groups that they are really related with natural resources access. That is part of what Emma was explaining to us. And a little bit of the main drivers, and you will see a commonality: economic power, land tenure rights, well-being access, different type of profitability, and social inequalities, and all is related with natural resource access. All is related with the well-being of our people. And so this is a first map showing us that in the arc of deforestation of the Colombian Amazon, there is multiple type of conflicts based on looking for different land access and land rights, different type of cattle ranching, illegal cattle ranching, or non-suitable cattle ranching because of the type of soil that we are talking about, but also coca production. And this next map is the trafficking of the wildlife in the country. So we can see also commonalities with the previous map that is coming from the Amazon in the boundaries of Peru, Ecuador, and Brazil, coming towards the interior of the country and going to the neighboring countries, the roots of the illegal trafficking. And this one is the trafficking of timber, and the illegal traffic of timber trade, and we have additional commonalities with the previous one that comes as well in the transboundary areas with Brazil, Peru, Ecuador, and also with the Caribbean borders. Remembering that Colombia has 11 borders and is 50% land and 50% ocean. And this map is the new and illegal emerging groups. And if we overlap with the previous one, we can see the commonalities, and we will see a little bit later. This is sadly one of the maps showing from where are the social and the environmental leaders assassinated during the last 5 years. Labeling in a sadly way that Colombia is one of the most dangerous countries. And here is a little bit of the overlap of where are the illegal groups trying to overcome illegal trafficking of wildlife, timber, and illegal mining, and also the coca production. So all these colors are all these overlapping that I was talking about. And if we go deep enough to the Amazon and the arc of deforestation in Colombia, as I was saying, has been the core of all these pillars of conflicts over natural resources: mining, land grabbing, illegal cattle ranching, timber, wildlife. And all these became commodities after doing different type of money laundering that all of us, we use from our different countries and perspectives. And if we go deep enough and we have an overlap of a map of conflict and armed groups and protected areas, we start to see how the protected areas, especially in the borders with Brazil, Ecuador, and Peru, are suffering with different type of illegal mining. But also, and I think the map, the graph doesn't see very well from the back, I'm sorry, that the gold prices has been increased 3 times, 4 times since COVID. Illegal mining, but clear in our financial system. Why? You will answer yourselves the reason why the mining prices and start to increasing and promoting not only gold mining, but also different type of metals and materials, not only for the energy transition, technology, commodities, but also to serve as the reserves of our banking systems all over the world. So that said, is not a Colombian problem, it's a transnational problem, it's a global problem that we need to address, since due to the higher prices, even higher prices compared to cocaine. 1 gram of cocaine right now is less costly than a grain from gold. So there's a lot of things to think about. And also to understand the synergies between the forest loss, the biodiversity loss, the contamination of our waters, the public health, but also in terms of the land degradation, the land transformation, and the incremental effects in our climate, and also in the ecological integrity of the Amazon. And this is some graphs in terms of those protected areas affected by illegal mining, in terms of how they are really being affected. And as I said, the Amazon is affected by a tipping point, especially because of illegal mining, because of forest degradation and land transformation. And in the arc of deforestation from Brazil, Venezuela, Bolivia, Peru, and Ecuador are the same type of conflicts. And the way to address is, as I said, not only national and regional. The regional countries of the Amazon are really committed into really halt the deforestation, but also combating the illegal mining, and they are promoting, as part of the COP30, this type of synergies, and also they are increasing their voice in terms of different financial mechanisms, as the Tropical Forest Forever Facility, as a pledge to have the means to maintain forest and reduce land conversion, but also to promote directly access to the communities. And these are the 3 R's that at WWF we are promoting in terms of promoting different voices, the different natural resources access, different equalities, rights, women voices, youth voices, in terms of really moving to an energy transition in a just and equitable transition. And as part of the tools for democratization and access to natural resources, we have also need to provide different type of alternatives to our communities. But that we cannot do it alone. We are working in different type of advocacy in terms of Escazú agreement, but also in terms of the Minamata Convention, the UNEA resolutions, in terms of having different type of governance and multilateral and global governance towards minerals, towards transition, just transition, and equity, and an inclusive transition for our communities and our countries. And as I said, to end, from COP16 to COP30. COP16, Colombia mobilized a voluntary resolution towards peace with nature, understanding the links between security, nature loss, climate, resilience, human rights, just transition, local economies with peace. So that means peace with nature. And what is next? Based on the agreements, double agree with the 8 countries in the Amazon, we are calling to promote an incredible voice in this COP30 for all these synergies to really commit to reduce deforestation and halt land degradation, to commit to different type of financial mechanisms. And the minerals as a perfect example, and especially the illegal mining, of understanding the synergies in terms of the biodiversity loss, the human rights abuses, the community needs, and the climate effects, in terms of also adopting the tropical forest mechanism to be able to really address not only these local, national, regional, and global challenges. So I think it's up to us to understand that all of us, we have an Amazon with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandra. That was really interesting, and I'm sure we could have listened to you for about an hour at least, but we can continue now in the panel with all these topics. So I will present the panel. So we have Sandra joining us still, and then we have Marwan El-Krekshi, who is the head of CMI Martti Ahtisaari Peace Foundation's Middle East and North Africa program, where he works on dialogue processes in Libya, Maghreb, Sahel, Palestine, Yemen, and Iraq. And previously, Marwan has worked for UNDP, for example, and World Food Programme. And we are very happy to have you here, Marwan. Thank you for coming. Then we have Antti Rautavaara, who is Finland's Special Envoy for Water. So he advocates Finnish waterway strategy, which is a kind of an international water strategy, which is quite unique that Finland has. I'm sure that you'll say a few words about that as well. And he has previously worked in several posts, for example, in Sweden, China, Ethiopia, and Nepal, and also worked previously for UNICEF and UNDP and the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry. And then also we have a commentator for the panel. So we have the pleasure of welcoming Nina Elomaa, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer at S Group. And she works on sustainability and believes in positive development in the role of businesses in tackling sustainability challenges, and has wide experience in different fields of business like energy, sourcing, food industry, retail, and so on. So Nina will give her comments after the panel, and we'll be looking forward to that. Okay, but now to get started with the actual panel questions, I thought we will first give the chance for Marwan and Antti to speak and say a few words about the same topics as Sandra just outlined from the WWF Colombia's point of view, but maybe you could briefly introduce how you work on these issues yourself, and how are you or your organization concerned with these questions of environment and peace? Maybe Marwan, if you want to start.
Okay, good morning everyone, and thank you for the previous speakers. I think they've laid the ground in terms of, elaborating and explaining the linkage between environmental issues, natural resource questions, and conflicts, so I will not go into that. So basically, just to say that CMI is a Finnish private foundation working on conflict resolution and dialogue processes, and we are not as such experts on this thematic, so we are not natural resources experts, nor are we environmental experts. But we do look at this thematic of natural resources management principles as an entry point in contexts of protracted conflict. So for us, it's more an instrument or an entry point to try to unlock very protracted political conflicts, or try to advance this dialogue among conflict actors in situations where it's a bit difficult to tackle straight on more political issues. So as examples, I can cite Libya, where, as you probably know, there has been a revolution back in 2011, or an uprising, and still the country is undergoing a transition that is not progressing very well, I have to say. But we, back in 2015, when there was a renewed, let's say, round of armed conflict among the various belligerents in the country, we looked at the issue of the constitutional process. So the country is lacking a new constitution or a new social contract. And our analysis of the situation is that the issue of natural resources, and more specifically oil, is one of the key conflict drivers. And for the country to move forward, there needs to be, this issue needs to be somehow captured in the new constitution. So we facilitated dialogue among the key political actors, some of the key community leaders in the oil-producing regions, together with the Constitution Drafting Assembly, on this issue of natural resources management principles, how this should be captured in the new constitution. And it proved to be a very fruitful entry point to advance dialogue in a situation where the parties were not willing to sit at the table otherwise. The topic itself was deemed important, of great importance, let's say, to the national interest, but also it was a theme that was deemed safe for everyone to engage on without, facing political backlash from their own supporters. And in retrospect, it proved to be a very useful entry point, and through that process, we have been able to work on specific national reconciliation processes with some of the communities. We've been able to continue advancing interpolitical party dialogue. So all these, the seeds of all of these kind of work streams that we're still working on were laid back in 2015 when we started this process that was focusing on the issue of natural resources management principles. So it was, in my view, a successful entry point. The other example relates to Iraq. So basically, well, as you might probably know, Iraq shares 2 rivers with Turkey, Syria, and Iran. There are also some water resources coming from that side. And there is a lack of a regional cooperation mechanism to discuss this issue of shared water resources. But more importantly, there is a lack of a regional cooperation framework generally speaking, between Arab countries and non-Arab countries, or specifically between Iraq, Iran, and Turkey. So we took water diplomacy as an entry point to advance regional dialogue. The added value, I believe, of the process we advanced was that it was multi-stakeholder in nature, meaning that we did not focus only on the water experts, who actually meet and are relatively on the same wavelength on many issues, but we included also foreign and security policy stakeholders, so that there are clearer, let's say, linkages, and also given the fact that this topic of water resources is highly securitized in many of these contexts. And that, I think, proved also to be a quite successful entry point to advance regional dialogue, broadly speaking, but also focusing more specifically on the issue of water. Maybe just to say that as much as it can be an entry point for dialogue, the issue of natural resources or water diplomacy, it doesn't always, let's say, work. I mean, there are some cases where, despite having peace agreements, we don't see that translating into greater, let's say, cooperation on water resources. One of the examples being the Arab-Israeli conflict. So despite the peace agreement between Jordan and Israel, there are still major issues in relation to water questions. Also, in relation to the Arab-Israeli conflict, despite many years of track 2 diplomacy or informal dialogue on water questions, in this latest round of war that started 2 years ago, water was used as a weapon from the onset. So just to say that it works sometimes, but it doesn't work always. Thanks.
Thank you, Marouane, and thank you also for pointing out that it's not kind of obvious that it always works with natural resources. And thank you also for building a nice bridge for Antti to walk on with regard to water. So
walk on water.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Emma. So my name is Antti Rautavaara, coming from the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, where we have a Center for Peace Mediation. We have a Finnish waterway strategy that is 5 ministries joint international water strategy, started 2018 and runs until 2030. We have one of the 3 pillars named as water and peace. And the thinking there was that we've been, since 1960s, very strong advocate for the transboundary water cooperation. We've been initiating both global water conventions that set the principles for sharing waters between countries located in the same basin. And then we have this very strong history and background with peace mediation. So the thinking was that how can we combine the two? And the concept of water diplomacy that Marouane also mentioned, and some examples of it, for us is a very much an umbrella term. So when we talk about the water is the connector of, I would say, if not all, at least most of the issues, also what Sandra was explaining. The role of water in mining or forestry is very clear. So when we talk about the water diplomacy, you are trying to find means and ways how to engage into a peace mediation process by utilizing our expertise in the natural resources and let's say also on the water side. I want to say, as I'm sitting here next to Marouane, that we have a very strong peace mediation organization, CMI, Finnish Church Aid, FELM, just to mention a few. And then now we have had for the past 5 years the Center for Peace Mediation located in the Foreign Ministry. And then we also have President Stubb, who is very strong advocate for the peace mediation and getting a very strong global acknowledgement for his work on this fora as well. So I think it's a quite unique situation where we as a Finnish society stand vis-a-vis that having the organizations and then foreign ministry as an actor in peace mediation as well as head of state level engaged. And for Center for Peace Mediation we have 4 priority areas. One is traditional and religious leaders, women, peace and security, youth, peace and security, and also water diplomacy. And I suppose I see that water diplomacy is one of the sort of tangible sector-wide thoughts where we can then utilize these other 3 areas in the actual work. I want to mention one, we work with water diplomacy roughly something like 10 to 12 different files where we are utilizing different types of methodologies to engage. So I agree with Marwan's view that water diplomacy is mostly a tool for the foreign service to actually engage in different topics, or the organizations. So one of the files that where we actually did not engage at the end, but it gives you a reflection what it could be, is that we have the brutal war going in Sudan, and of course the Blue Nile and White Nile are coming together in Khartoum, and there are several dams along both of these rivers. And there was a situation, or still is, that the SAF is occupying, for example, the dam of Jebel Aulia, which is just 15 kilometers upstream along the White Nile of Khartoum. And there were some of the missiles actually hitting the dam structure. So then there was an emergent thinking that, okay, instead of actually talking about the hardcore peace mediation talks, which were at the time completely impossible to engage with, there was a thinking that maybe the international community could come together and convince the 2 parties that the dams are existential for the people for the long run. So whoever wins this war that is ongoing in Sudan, in 10 or 20 years' time, they would need to have those dams in place, intact. And maybe that could be like the first step on the ladder to get the parties engaged, while all the other issues were completely unacceptable to discuss. So water diplomacy is I would say that the innovation is your limit. You can utilize it in different forms, and we've been at least been engaging through utilizing water know-how in foreign policy processes through roundtables, through back channeling, being an observer of discussions, providing strategic support for the parties of the negotiations, and also having these parallel negotiation tracks. So there might be a real peace negotiation track, but those are always very sensitive, so you need to have something built parallel. So if the actual track collapses, you would have at least something ongoing between the parties. So I was maybe a little bit too long, but there.
That's okay, we can live with that. But now back to, thank you Antti, that was very interesting and very useful examples also. I know it can be also difficult to talk about the work that the ministry does, because of course some of it is somehow sensitive, but I'm happy that you could share some concrete examples as well. But yes, back to Sandra. I was wondering, and you kind of already addressed this a little bit maybe, or at least we could sort of understand maybe some of your views in your presentation, but still just to ask, do you think that environment-related risks and these linkages between environment and peace are adequately taken into account in sort of security policy making in Colombia or globally? And if not, then what do you think are the main gaps?
Thank you, Emma. I believe in the security policies, the environmental risk and social. Oh, so thank you. I believe that in the security policies, the environmental risks or damages or the biodiversity loss and climate change effects and the interlinked social effects and needs of inclusive and climate and social justice are not really incorporated and even understood into the security policies. I think part of that is that all the environmental and related social issues are seen in silos. So is the environment under its shoulders the ones to really address social and environmental interrelated issues? But that is not the real work. We need to address into the security policies, into the treasury policies, into the defense, into the agriculture, into the mining, into the infrastructure, to really address the conflicts that they are damaging the environment, but they are also damaging the social well-being. And that, as the example of the Amazon and the illegal mining, shouldn't be addressed only at the local level. It should be addressed at the regional, as the Amazonian countries are trying to aim for, but also it should be at the most sub-regional in terms of the Latin countries, but also it is necessary to do it at the global and at the multilateral, and also in other national and international affairs. And that was the point that I was trying to make in terms of that all of us, we have an Amazon, that the Finnish people has an Amazon and has a footprint in the Amazon in terms of their own commodities. And with the example of the illegal mining and trying to address to the question the illegalities shouldn't be addressed only at national, but also kind of in the multiple levels, but also multiple synergies and different point of view. So we need to understand the international trade, why we are kind of requesting a different type of commodities, how we do the money laundering, so the financial system, the banking and the central bank system, and the trade in terms of commerce, commodities, luxury, textiles, and all these lifestyles that we are pushing for different type of illegalities, that they are related to the environmental degradation and increasing social and conflicts worldwide.
Thank you. Excellent points. Maybe building upon that, if both Maruan and Antti could at least briefly address, because it seems to me that although you both work for organizations that are traditionally not primarily devoted to environment, but more work on the peace and security issues, but yet both of your organizations have, as you just explained, have engaged on environmental issues as well and natural resources. So what do you think have been the key sort of or keys to success to making it important for your organizations to address these issues, or what's the reason for that? If you have any thoughts on it. Yeah.
Thank you, Emma. I was wondering the word traditional. At least the foreign ministry is very traditional in many ways. But vis-a-vis the environmental work, I do think that the way Foreign Service has been addressing environment, natural resources and climate change for past sort of 30-40 years, somehow it also makes us to be let's say semi-traditional environmental actor, even though we are not perceived as such in many ways. Financing many organizations who work in this front. I sort of see that why is that coming into picture in foreign ministry now again, is that the climate change is appearing to us humans through water. So whatever it is, floods or droughts or pollution in the water, that's due to the fact that with the climate extremes are pushing. We know through the science cooperation that hydrological cycle is off balance. So that is already a reality. It just took too long for us in Europe to understand that this is also a European problem. This is also a Finnish problem. We have winter floods. We never heard that before, having floods in the winter, but now that's a reality that we need to face. And how could we engage with this then was that there was Indian think tank called a Strategic Foresight Group who something like 7 years ago published analysis on the transboundary rivers, and they came out with very strong sentence saying that any 2 or more countries who have functional transboundary water cooperation do not go for war for whatever reason. Indian think tank. Anyone following news? Indus Water Treaty being used as, let's say, a tool in a conflict instead of just being the connector of the nations. And on Indus, we have a situation where also through science we know that the melting of the Himalayan glaciers is causing first increasing and then after 2050s steeply decreasing water volumes in Indus as well as Amur Darya. So those will be the 2 most affected rivers. So if we think past the Indus Treaty, which is from 1960, we see that the geopolitics have changed in the region because the population growth has taken place, huge increases in numbers of people who are directly related through their food security on the river, as well as then the climate changes. So that leads to a situation where water may not only be the connector, but also might be that tool that countries are utilizing for their disputes. And why is this then interesting for us in Finland? Because our own agreement with our eastern neighbor is from 1964. So the same era agreement. And we've been thinking now, trying to look to both and see that why is that happening on the Indus? And why are we able to cope with our neighbor regardless of this geopolitical turmoil that is taking place in Russian aggression to Ukraine? And some of the reasons might be in the pragmatic way that we've been working with our relations with the neighbor. We continue to respect our agreement with Russia that covers all 19 rivers that cross from Finland to Russia, so we are upstream country. But very similar situation, very different solutions, and of course you cannot compare directly Finland, Russia with something like Pakistan, India. But if you look at the power balances in these geopolitical power balances, there are something that resembles the 2. So that's at least one example where I see why the foreign ministries as well as the security apparatuses of different countries should be aware of what's happening with the transboundary resources. And while I was talking about the water, this clearly applies to all of the natural resources. I'm not sure about the mining, but mining maybe too. But what you were explaining with your maps, Sandra, it was visible that this is not just the Colombian issues. These are all crossing the borders left and right. Thanks.
Thanks, Antti. Maruan, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, for us, I explained previously how we've utilized this thematic to advance dialogue, but maybe just to say that this approach kind of developed organically. It wasn't like some sort of conscious decision to engage in this theme, but it has emerged mostly from within the context where we are operating. So in the case of Libya, it was more of a based on very long process of consultations with the various stakeholders before we kind of decided on, okay, this could be an approach whereby we could engage programmatically in the country. And in the case of Iraq, also it was, we did not start our engagement there on this topic. So the initial idea was to advance civil society dialogue from an Iraqi perspective and look what are the key issues that need further, let's say, cooperation between Iraq and its neighbors. And based on these civil society consultations, the topic of water was ranked very high. And that's how we then started looking into ways of advancing this regional dialogue on water questions. So it's really, the entry point emanated from the consultations in the context where we are operating, and it was not like a predetermined approach.
Really interesting, thank you, and that's good to know. Then maybe again to Sandra, it's quite obvious that there are many actors who need to take part in these questions or like discussions about the environment and peace and conflict. But who do you think are really the main actors who have to be involved, and how also maybe, because you are a civil society organization, I guess it often falls upon you to also to kind of advocate that these processes or discussions are inclusive. So how do you advocate that sort of all the right actors are taking part in them?
I think part of being inclusive conservation and addressing social justice and climate justice for territorial peace. We need to understand who is in the territory and their own rights and how they have been even affected by the different type of conflict and the escalation of it. And in that sense, for the Amazon, we have to take into consideration the indigenous groups, other local communities are as farmers that they are located there, or even communities that they were forced or relocated to the different areas because different type of conflicts. And if we go deeper in that, women has been really affected by different conflicts in the Amazon. And mining is not the exception because of the roles and responsibilities of women or indigenous women or farmers women. We need to understand how they are also victims because of the conflict, but also the rights, the roles, and how we should address in a differentiated way, but an inclusive one. Youth has been also considered as part of the victims of the conflict, and we need to readdress and rethink different ways of doing it. And these are part of the core of the communities that have rights and needs to be heard and have a voice. And the way that we should address the conflict needs to be addressing, understanding the human rights approach, and especially the non-harm approach, because the way that we address need to be not only respect and listen and understand their identities, and the rights, but also don't put it in the middle of the conflict, that they can be also being affected by the illegality or the illegal groups as part of the environmental and social leaders and defenders that has been killed. So with that into consideration as part of the core, or being as a WWF inclusive and equitable conservation organization, and including all the different voices and rights, we need to understand other rights that they are related. It can be also the public officers that they are affected as well because of the conflict, but also the nature as a right. And in Colombia, it's very important. We have different type of sentences and decisions from the court, and one from in the Amazon and another in the Pacific that they are mining affected, that the court decide that the nature has also, and the rivers, as talking about the water diplomacy, has different type of rights, and therefore the decision to protect them. And so that is another stakeholder that we don't listen. And there are the links that, Emma, you were referring, and to the direct and indirect causes, and also the cascade that you were explaining to us in terms of the nature as a right to be defended. And there we can also include other type of voices and stakeholders and so on and so forth. But I think I will stay with kind of these two.
Thank you, Sandra. And I have to say, at this point, now that we're talking about actors and participants in different processes, I realized that in the beginning I didn't necessarily say directly that we are organizing this seminar with WWF Finland. So thank you very much for your participation and very crucial role in organizing this event. But actually, I could then move to Maruan, also having to do a little bit with these different actors and participants in discussions, and especially the work on peace mediation, which can be very sort of political and sensitive activity. And when you're discussing these things like natural resources or water, you often, I would imagine that you also discuss very sensitive topics in a way where you kind of have to ensure that you maintain this sort of sensitive contacts to the participants in these processes, and that you are able to address the correct questions behind, for example, the issues about the use of resources. But then at the same time, you don't want to alienate in a way the participants who need to take part in the discussion. So how do you balance between these issues?
Well, maybe to say that the real work then is during dinner and on the coffee breaks. So the actual discussion, of course, most of the work we do is mostly informal in nature. So I think that's kind of the added value of organizations like us, is that we can convene actors in informal settings. They can participate in their, let's say, personal capacity. We usually keep these, most of these dialogue processes kind of confidential. And this kind of creates an environment where participants can really discuss more freely and go beyond, let's say, their official positions to explore various ways of trying to unlock certain conflicts. So yeah, so I think how the actual workshop or dialogue process is designed is quite important. So to keep the discussion in such a way that it focuses on the national interest, because ultimately that's what we're aiming for, is that these political actors, despite their differences, they could look at this issue of natural resources management principles from a national interest point of view, to put their differences on the side to tackle these kind of immediate issues that affect their country. And as Antti gave the example from Sudan, I think it's kind of telling. So basically, in a warfare situation where things are very unlocked, you try to pinpoint into an issue where it's basically, if you don't address this, it's basically the future of your nation that is at stake, and you really need to address it despite all of your differences. But as said, I mean, for us, the topic is really the thematic focus regarding natural resources is really to try to bring these conflict parties to the table, and then on the sidelines really try to explore ways of how to then advance the more, let's say, political issues. And I mean, I was not joking when I was saying that actually the dinners and the coffee breaks and all that happens outside of the actual meeting room is of very great importance.
Yes, I can imagine that it's important to have coffee and breaks in these discussions. Okay, then Antti, I guess it's also quite obvious that when we are talking about water and peace and security, we need maybe different kinds of knowledge and a kind of understanding than in some other sort of purely political diplomatic discussions, for example. So what do you think, what kind of knowledge production or other similar action is needed to sort of convert this research-based information on, for example, the environmental crisis to policy making? And do you have any good examples of how this has been done in a useful way?
Thanks. I hope I would have already mentioned science cooperation. If not, I think it's integral, because if we think about foreign ministries or, with all due respect, CMI, when it comes to, understanding, for example, volumes of reservoirs for some dam, it's not their bread and butter. So there is scientific community in the environmental, water, natural resources side who are creating a wealth of information. And if I'm quite honest, I at times feel that I'm sort of some sort of translator between those who actually know and then those who are actors in foreign and security policy processes. And believe it or not, I'm a civil engineer myself, even though I don't feel like that much. But that information needs to get through. It needs to be concise, understandable, so that in difficult discussions that information can actually be realized. But if you give EU special representative a 200 pages document, they don't know what the issue is. And I would pick one example. We were supporting EU in the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam negotiations some years ago, providing a strategic oversight, sort of a doctor's second opinion type of thoughts in their role as observers in those negotiations. And all the time that the parties of the Eastern Nile, they were coming with very, maybe justified but strong statements about the volume of water being restored in the reservoir. And of course trying to make their case influence the negotiation for their benefit. And I remember talking with Thea Tönrus, who's here today as well, that can we actually get the real figure, what's the volume? And in the first place we could say that what is the surface area, but not that much of an information. You needed to know the volume. And I don't know how you did it, but the bright minds in Finnish Environment Institute somehow could come up with using satellite imagery in a way that we actually knew the amount of water inbounded into the dam. And having that type of information coming from the scientific side to support the negotiation is quite, it's turning the tables, because those who are in the room, they actually know that now this party is not giving the truth. And just one example where it really made a difference for the discussions.
Thank you. The really interesting examples. I'm thinking that we could maybe start to open the discussion a little bit. I still have some very interesting questions of my own left, but I can then see if I have time to ask them later. But maybe I will first of all encourage all of you to think of questions to the panelists. But maybe at this point I would invite Nina to give her comments to the panel.
Yeah.
Feel free to take the podium.
Okay, thank you very much, and I want to also thank you, the panelists, and Emma for the really interesting opening remarks and also the comments that were coming from the panel. My name is Nina Elomaa, and I come from S Group, which is of course a company. So I come from the private sector, and I would also like to little bit during my comments to reflect the topics that were raised in the panel discussion and what kind of activities we have also in the private sector. Emma started with the biodiversity loss, pollution and climate change and the natural resources and what kind of challenges we are facing and how they threaten the livelihoods and societal resilience around the world. Couldn't agree more, and I think that the panelists also raised the same kind of topics and discussed the same things. So I want to emphasize that this is also a very important issue in the private sector when we are thinking about the natural resources and how we use them and what kind of impacts we have on them. And I think that's a really an important aspect. One thing that I was thinking also when thinking about the discussion today was actually about the geopolitical discussion and how the geopolitical situation has affected actually the polarization in the world. And I think this is also an important aspect and that we need to understand. The polarization doesn't help us to see the need for collaboration and how to collaborate. It is pulling us away from each other. And I think the important factor, what we heard also in the panel, is that we need to work together. And this means working together with all different actors and along and in the societies. No state, no organization, and no single person can solve these problems alone. So what we need to do and understand is that the only path is to go together. What I also kind of learned, and I think it was really well raised by Sandra, is the global, local, regional and national aspects. This also shows that we have to understand that even in Finland we have the impacts that are actually impacting the natural resources and also the security of supply all around the world. We in S Group, we have calculated our biodiversity footprint, and I have to say that over 90% of the impacts we have on biodiversity are coming outside of Finland. So this also emphasizes the importance to understand what was mentioned, the international trade. And what kind of activities we need to do. So again, I would say the collaboration is a key. The other aspect that was highlighted is also that it is really difficult at the moment to actually diversify the human rights and the environmental aspects and the security issues from one another. And I have to say also that when you think about the sustainability challenges that we are facing and how they are framed, it is actually really hard to separate the human rights and the environmental topics and the social sustainability and security from one another. And this is also something I think that what United Nations also in their General Assembly resolution said, that actually right to health, healthy environment is a human right, and I think that's an aspect that we need to also consider when we are discussing these environmental topics. Emma highlighted also the risks and the environmental risks and what is their meaning and what kind of direct risk we can actually have. And the risk-based approach is very, of course, well known for the companies and private sector actors. We really do also evaluate what kind of risks we have for our businesses in the future. And I think that's also both the directed but also the cascading and the transition risks that were mentioned. What was also important to note was that in many of the conflicts that we have in the world, the background is in the natural resources. But on the other hand, the natural resources can be then the way also to open the dialogue. And I found this approach very interesting and haven't thought it from that point of view. It can be the entry point to the dialogue. It can be also the reason to the conflict. And that's why the different type of diplomacies, like the water diplomacy, is a really important tool for everybody to use when this kind of situations occur. The inclusive and just process to take the different stakeholders into the discussion and think about the regions and the people's rights and the local communities in the advocacy work, in the work when we start resolving the crisis or the conflicts, is an important factor. It was also interesting to see that we have these translators between the science and policymakers, which I also find an important, and this also emphasizes once again the collaboration need between the different actors in the society. I will end my comment by saying that the real work is done during the dinners and the coffee breaks. I think it's also really important that we understand that also the kind of the human contact that we have and the discussion, the informal kind of discussions play a role when we are trying to resolve either environmental topics or the kind of conflicts or whatever kind of social things we have in the society, what we need to emphasize. Thank you very much.
Excellent, thank you, Nina. That was a really good kind of summary of the discussion, and also very good points of view from the business side. Thank you. Maybe at this point we could give the floor to our audience. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand. Okay, there is a gentleman in here. You can go first, yes. And please present yourself as you're speaking or asking the question.
Thank you. I am Matti Nummelin. I'm the chair of the National Committee of IUCN in Finland. Well, only in the last commenter mentioned the word biodiversity. And I would like to speak a little bit about the conservation of nature as a tool for peace building. And we have a very good example very close to us. We had an excellent collaboration, cross-border collaboration with Russia, until it ended very quickly when Russia attacked Ukraine. And I really feel sad for that, because it was also a part of the green belt of Europe. And when the Soviet Union collapsed and the states came, or the Eastern European states became a part of Europe, more part of Europe, so actually the green belt between those blocks were used for nature conservation. So my question is that do you see any hope for the peace building through cross-border nature conservation? And a little bit more than that idea, not only the terrestrial conservation, but also we have the Baltic Sea. We had an excellent collaboration within Baltic Sea for its conservation, so its water quality, its conservation of its biodiversity. Now it's more or less a military zone. Thank you. Could you comment on that?
Yes, thank you. Maybe we can take a few more questions. There's here one, please.
Tony Addison from Wider in Copenhagen University. Can you actually hear me? Yeah. Tony Addison from Wider and Copenhagen University. So ultimately what we want is clean supply chains, the absence of human rights violations, environmental destruction, and so forth. And that applies to all materials, timber, minerals, oil, whatever we're thinking about. So my question is that the Nordic region is a very good example about how you can use natural resources to increase national and community prosperity. You look right across the region, Finland to Norway to Denmark. Historically, a lot of your prosperity has been, at least initially, generated by natural resources. So you have a comparative advantage in the resource and conflict space, and a comparative advantage in the sort of new agendas around clean supply chains. So I wonder, my question is how the panel thinks that the Nordic region and within the European community, the European Union, could advance the agenda further to get further leverage on the issues, particularly on international action. Because as Sandra pointed out, a lot of the illegal minerals and other resources are entering international supply chains. We do our best to eliminate those illegal resources, but still a lot is getting through. So in what ways could Finland and the other Nordic partners promote international and European action? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then maybe one more question. There is one in the background. Please, lady with glasses.
Thank you. Okay, good. I'm Katja Pellini. I come from Plan International. Thank you very much for your presentations and also for Sandra to reminding us that Amazon is here. So my question relates to our global responsibility, and I as a civil society organization, but maybe citizens more broadly. What are the ways that we can have peace negotiations at the global level and being in solidarity with the groups that you were talking about, the women and youth-led groups in Colombia and all these zones where conflict is also, we are part and parcel of that conflict of being part of the global supply chain that consumes some of the issues that the conflict is arise from. So what's your kind of recommendation? How can we build it? And I know that also, of course, in Finland we have indigenous groups who are fighting for their rights. So in this era of kind of division and securitization, what is your recommendation for the role of global civil society to act on it? As solidarity, especially to groups in countries like yours.
Thank you. Thanks. Very good questions. So we have the potential for peace building, I guess, between Europe and Russia with regard to environmental conservation work. Then we have the role of the Nordic countries in advancing environmental action globally. And finally, the possibilities for sort of taking into account and keeping or ensuring the participation of these indigenous groups and civil society organizations in sort of global peace or peace negotiations. So I give all of you a chance to choose what you want to answer, and then we can see if we still have a chance for another round of questions. But maybe Sandra, if you want to start.
I think part of the call to action in terms of the EU and a proof of concept is what we have been working in terms of the agro-food commodities with the EU regulations in terms of the traceability, because that has been kind of showing a positive effect in terms of our countries, in terms of supply, and demonstrating that we can really prove the traceability, the legality, and that there is a positive trade and commerce towards really having triple and positive impact business models. So I think that is an example that the EU regulations has been kind of pushing the business and the business in the whole supply chain. And so we can do it with other type of business, with the commodities, but also including not the typical suspects, because we don't include the financial sector as part of agent of change, or that has to be really addressed an EU regulation in terms of risk, de-risking, and also being part of the solution in terms of their own clients or so on. So I think the power demonstrated with agribusiness is really moving, and we have very good examples in terms of the private sector, but also including social and environmental safeguards into consideration in terms of promoting equity and equitable distribution agreements for communities, for labor, and so on. So I think you are fully right. There is good examples here in terms of the good and the adequate use of natural resources, provide prosperity and inclusion, and demonstrate kind of that there is not a linear way of using the value chain, but it's a circular, and it's a circular economy, as we can see in the Nordic countries. So I will say, yes, the power and the agenda, and that is the global agenda that we need as an example. And going back to the solidarity, I think there is multiple ways of seeing the solidarity. I think even for the right to electing the proper and the adequate decision makers here is one that really demonstrate commitment in terms of internal footprint and external footprint and commitment overseas. And that was the reason that I was making a call to action in terms of the decision that has to be taken into consideration in UNEA in November, but also in COP30 and next year's and so on, or in the desertification, in terms of the co-responsibility of Finland, for instance, in terms of really committed, in terms of reducing and halt deforestation and land degradation, and the links with the biodiversity loss and the human rights abuse. And you have here the right to choose even your delegates and your representatives and your country decision makers. That has to be kind of inconsequent on that. So that is a way of being kind of responsible. Another way is the type of lifestyles that we go, and as consumers, the request that we are doing so. Or also working towards promoting different type of investments in the different countries and in the different communities that has been affected directly by the different footprint or consumer options that the different countries has. And I think part of being a civil society organization is the possibility also to promote different strategies, not only necessary to complain, but to promote the collaboration, to promote the changes, to address the changes in a very positive way. Is a possibility to be responsible and sensitive with what is going on in the other side of the world that has a very strong link with the Arctic as well. That is part of examples that I can share at the moment.
Thank you, Sandra. Then maybe Marwan next, or Antti, looks like. Okay.
Marwan wants to have the last word.
Okay.
A little bit trying to respond to Matti, and of course I'm looking through the water lenses, but there is the UNECE Helsinki Water Convention in place, and it has, or globally we have 153 countries who share waters with their neighbors, and 56 parties today, 20 in accession. Finland and Russia both are parties to that agreement, and it has or sets the principles for transboundary water cooperation. And as part of that, also conservation and restoration of ecosystems is included, as well as cooperation and equitable sharing of the waters. But maybe what I'm trying to say is that there are tools, but it's more or less how can we remember to utilize them also for those parts in the agreements which may not be, on top of the list. So that's one example that I got think through my water lenses. And then for Unu wider sharing of natural resources, just through examples again, we talked a little bit about the Indus before, and I think one of the key problems of this conflict is that in 1960s it was a pure water allocation agreement. So they said you take 3 rivers, the other 3 for the other one. So just splitting the resource and not really sharing or looking beyond the river itself, that what benefits they might find if they look at the food security, energy security and water security needs of both countries. So if anyone would ask from me, I would really just suggest the countries to look at that direction, that they could gain much more from the same resource if they try to share it together. Another one where we are a little bit now trying to scope what could be done, so we are not engaged, but thinking about it. A border dispute, and the location of the border actually defines who gets the right to exploit the natural resources in that area. And one solution, of course, could be that you are not just talking about the border dispute itself, but you talk about the joint benefits. So maybe there could be a joint company established between the parties who would have the right to explore those natural resources, maybe combining it with a trade corridor example. So really trying to find that benefit that the natural resources is providing for both parties, not just like who gets it. 2 examples from the water side.
Yeah, just maybe brief comments from my side. On the Baltic Sea, I mean, that's an interesting example actually. Before things became very complicated after Ukraine and so on, we brought a few times stakeholders from the Red Sea coastal countries, because that region also is looking at models for cooperation. And there are no regional cooperation mechanisms basically straddling the Horn of Africa and the other side of the Red Sea, namely the GCC countries. And at that time, the Baltic Sea looked as a very kind of good model for cooperation. And it would be actually interesting to see whether any of those cooperation models are still existing in the Baltic Sea in these current circumstances. But I think it's a good example to look at. The Nordic model was mentioned, and maybe I'll comment from a broad perspective, just saying that, for example, our founder, Martti Ahtisaari, used to talk quite a lot about the Nordic model as a model that really advances social cohesion and stability. And I guess that also then reflects into the issue of natural resources and how those are managed in this part of the world. But I guess that even here in the Nordics, it's not an ideal situation. I think if we ask the Sami people how they look at this issue of natural resources, then there might be a bit different answers to this. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for all the good answers. We are starting to get closer to the end of the seminar, and maybe I will selfishly reserve the right of the last question to the panelists for myself. So I've been wondering, because of course, at least in Europe, there's a clear sort of tendency at the moment to kind of turn back to this very traditional sort of military security policy. And the questions of, for example, how environmental degradation affects security is somehow being sidelined a little bit, at least it seems to me. You're also of course, free to challenge that view. But what do you think that it means for example, biodiversity questions? And what would be the arguments for keeping biodiversity and environment on the agenda of security, even in this geopolitical situation? And if you have any other closing remarks, then please feel free to quite briefly formulate them now. Maybe I will again start with Sandra.
I think in order to keep the nexus between security, biodiversity loss, climate effects, and social inequalities, is to understand that if we don't address social justice and environmental justice, we will have an increase in terms of conflict due to access of natural resources, because we understand the different type of conflict, and including political or war, depending of the escalation, are because of land or because of different type of natural resource access, renewable or non-renewable. And if we understand that promoting an inclusive and equitable access to natural resources and a distribution and a shared responsibility, local, regional, globally, we will reduce the level of investments in terms of security or wars. Therefore, promoting much better prosperity and equalities. Because otherwise we will not be seeing that all the countries are reducing their investment in biodiversity and climate and social change, because they need to address wars or budget for wars. Therefore, reducing the possibility of an equitable prosperity at global and national and local levels. So if we understand all these nexus and we don't forget, we will really refer environment into security, and understanding that investing in environment is not is a de-risking effect, and the possibility to really reduce conflicts and wars and polarization
Thank you. Then Maruan, and I have to ask you to be quite brief.
Well, I don't have anything to add, so I'll just give the floor to Ant.
Well, I really also like what you, Sandra, said at the end, but I do want to say that maybe as a personal opinion that I think it's somehow the current climate, at least the discussion in Finland and Europe, is just, about hard security, about the military needs, etc. And I personally do think that there are other issues that are making our world very insecure. And I'm a little bit sad seeing that we are just slowly looking at one element of the entirety. So if we look at the different conflicts, in so many cases somehow natural resources are behind the conflict, or they could be used as a weapon of that conflict. Just think about Mariupol or Kakhovka or Sudanese case that I mentioned. So our natural resources have become weapon of war, which they should not be. They are also victims in many cases, like in the case of Kakhovka. So how can this be changed? I don't really think it can be changed, because the power lies at national security. So foreign services and security apparatuses in different contexts, they are always more powerful in a national scale than the people who work or agencies that work with environmental issues. But that given, I haven't said, I said that, but I also think that at times, if we are smart, we can be sitting in the back seat and leading from behind. If we push our topics on the agenda of those who actually can influence, well, we can ourselves. So I don't know how that resonates with you, but leading from behind, putting our agenda on the right tables, having other people drive it for us, not just us as in our, let's say now, environmentalist hats on. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all the panelists, and I don't have much to add as a sort of closing remarks. I think that those were really, really good. I guess just as a kind of a takeaway from this discussion, I think it's obvious that natural resources and environment are not kind of somehow additional to conflicts, but they are actually often a central feature and could be then also a key to their resolution. Then I think another really important point is this global, regional, local, national linkage that has been mentioned several times, and how we in Finland, for example, also need to think about the Amazon and how we affect it. And then I guess my final remark is that we can't really somehow think that we brush aside environmental issues for now, because we have other more important things to address, because we will then inevitably and probably sooner than later find these environmental problems ahead of us if we try to do that. So maybe on that somehow somber note, I will end the seminar. Thank you to all of the panelists and speakers and commentators, and thank you to the audience, and thank you to WWF Finland. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.